into Week 12 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few defense DST units I look to get this week. The first one, the Kansas City Chiefs. So all of a sudden, over the last 2 or 3 weeks here, this Chief defense has transformed into one of the better defenses in the league in terms of holding their opponents down and making plays. They shut down a high-powered Cowboy offense in Week 11. So the last few weeks here for the Chiefs, Week 9 versus Green Bay, 7 points allowed, a sack and into a fumble recovery, a block kick. Week 10 at the Vegas Raiders, 14 points allowed, 2 sacks and into, fumble recovery, and a 4th down stop. In Week 11 versus Dallas, they did a little bit of everything. 9 points allowed, 5 sacks, 2 windows, and a fumble recovery. I know Week 12 they're on bye, but right here they're a good stash, in my opinion, especially with a good matchup in Week 13 versus the Denver Broncos that give up the 10th most fantasy points to defenses on the season. So the Chiefs are turning the corner. Defense is getting a little bit healthier. And now they've won 4 ball games in a row. So whatever was wrong with them, they're turning it into a good thing. We're winning on the defensive end of things. And right now they are available in 71% of fantasy leagues. The next defense I look to get this week is the Seattle Seahawks. So this is a 1 week add, in my opinion, on the wire here, Seattle. This season, they pretty much haven't done much of Seattle, but they got a pretty decent matchup Week 12 at the Washington football team on Monday Night Football that gives up the 8th most fantasy points to defenses on the season. So the last few weeks here for Seattle, Week 8 versus Jacksonville, 7 points allowed, a sack and into, return touchdown. Week 10 at Green Bay, 17 points allowed, a sack and into, and Week 11 versus the Arizona Cardinals, 23 points allowed and 2 sacks, which obviously isn't good versus a backup quarterback in Colt McCoy. But right here, Taylor Heineke, you mentioned him as a waiver wire ad, but I think also Seattle could have a decent fantasy day. And right now, they're available in 90% of fantasy leagues and good for a 1 week ad on your roster. The next defense is the Chicago Bears. So the Bears, they've been in the middle of the pack defense this season. Right now, they're available in 82% of fantasy leagues, and over the last few weeks for them, Week 8 versus San Francisco, 33 points allowed. Week 9 at Pittsburgh, 24 points allowed, 4 sacks though, a fumble recovery and a touchdown. And Week 11 versus Baltimore, 16 points allowed, 6 sacks and an interception. But right here, Week 12, an amazing matchup at the Detroit Lions, who give up the 4th most fantasy points. And obviously, this is a Thanksgiving traditional game where the Bears pretty much each and every season on Thanksgiving go over there in Detroit, and I think they can make plays. We don't know if it's going to be Jared Goff or Boyle starting this game, but either way, this Bear defense can make plays even with Khalil Mack out for the season, in my opinion, and I think they could put up a good ball game. And like I mentioned, they're available in 92% of fantasy leagues. The next defense is the Houston Texans. So the Texans shocked the NFL world with a huge victory at the Tennessee Titans, 22-13 in their Week 11 matchup. And their defense played great, 13 points allowed, 2 sacks, 4 interceptions, and a fumble recovery. And now they got a great matchup coming up in Week 12 versus the New York Jets that give up the most fantasy points to defenses on the season. So the last couple weeks here for Houston, Week 8 versus the Rams, 38 points allowed, a sack in that one. Week 9 at Miami, 17 points allowed, 4 sacks, 2 windows, 3 fumble recoveries. And then Tennessee, like I mentioned, with that huge game. So right here, their unit's been better over the last few games, and I think they can do some damage versus Joe Flacco in this Jet offense. And it's definitely worth a shot, in my opinion. Available in 99% of fantasy leagues. And the 5th and final defense I look to get on the wire this week is the Philadelphia Eagles. So the Eagles here, they've been winning ball games now, and they've been getting hot here, winning 3 out of the last 4 this season. And it starts with the defense, especially Week 8 at Detroit, 6 points allowed, 6 sacks, a fumble recovery, and a touchdown. Week 9 versus the Chargers, 27 points allowed. Week 10 at Denver, 13 points allowed, a sack, a fumble recovery, a touchdown, a block kick. And Week 11 versus the Saints, a pretty good game, 29 points allowed, 2 windows, a fumble recovery, including a pick 6 by Darius Slay. So right here, Week 12, a pretty decent matchup at the Giants. I give up the 12th most fantasy points to defenses, and I think the Eagles could get to Daniel Jones a few times, and it wouldn't surprise me if they could find the end zone again on a pick 6. So right now, they're available in 82% of fantasy leagues, and I would add them on the wire this week. So that's your defense and special team units. I look to add on the waiver wire. heading into week 12 of the fantasy football season.